Kia ora! Tickets are now on sale for the 2025 Marlborough Book Festival, being held from 18 to 20 July. Book your spot and bring your friends, your whānau, and indulge in your love of good books and good company. Go to marlboroughbookfest.co.nz for the full list of wonderful writers who will be attending.
Ko au tētahi o ngā aho i te kaitaka huaki o whātonga, nō reira iho mā ngā whānau mā ka hara mai i tēnei ahi kei whakarongo ki te kōrero nei, i mihi ana ki a koutou. Ka hara mai, ka huri au ki tō tātou nei manuhiri, aoraki maunga, waitaki awa, ki a koe Nic, nau mai hara mai, he pai ki te ia koutou katoa, kei raro i te koro wai o te maunga tapa wai o Uanuku, nō reira tēnā koe, nau mai, piki mai, kaki mai. Kia ora everybody, welcome to this session. I'm going to hand it over to Nic first, and he's going to respond or introduce himself in the manner that he sees fit, and then we'll get into the discussion proper. Kei a koe te rākau.
Tēnā koe te rakatira. Kia koe, kia koutou, ka manuhiri, ka ahika o te wahi nei. Tēnā koutou, kia koutou katoa kua hui mai nei i tēnei rā. Tēnā koutou hoki, ko aoraki te mauka teitei, ko hana nui te mauka tūturu no te whenua o Murihikua hau, no Ngāi Tahu, ka ati māmoe me waitaha ka iwi. Ko Nic ahau, tēnā koutou. Friends, greetings, welcome. It is beautiful to be here with you all.
Kia ora. Today we're going to be talking about Uprising, walking the Southern Alps, a number of years of research, travelling on land and water, following the movements of ancestors. And the book's had received a number of awards and raving reviews. It received the CLNZ Writers Award and the Wiley Prize, was shortlisted for the New Zealand Heritage Book Awards, and was named New Zealand Listener and Australian Book Review Book of the Year. In saying all of that, I wouldn't usually read a book like this. And when the committee was looking for people to be MCs and interview authors, a number of books were kind of put up in my face, and I thought, oh, flippin' heck, there's poetry, I'm not that good at poetry, there's romance.
You're not a romantic?
I'm not a romantic, Rena can vouch for that. But your book, when I flicked through the pages, I thought, this is something I can kind of get into. And I flicked through the pages, and I saw names that I was, familiar with. Everyone will be familiar with. People like Tātipini O'Regan, Te Ngāti Tahu. I even saw my old university mate, Ian Cranwell, who back in the day was kind of like the what's his name, Mamoa of Otago University. He was big and strapping with muscles and hair pulled back. So it's quite nice to see his name in there as well. So there's a number of themes running through the book, and as we go through, I thought we could pick up on different threads. But I suppose the first thing to ask is, how's Lee and Ahi?
They're good. I was on a video chat with them. This is my partner and my son, who feature in the book, which might seem like a strange thing to feature in a book about, dudes going mountaineering. But yeah, there's a romance. I am a romantic. There's a romance story in there, and they are both well.
This book was a Trojan horse in that sense, because I don't do romance, and there was a. But if anyone's interested, if you've got a book, because it's actually sold out, and we're waiting for copies to arrive. If you go to page 171, there's a passage there, and even I knew what that was about. There was glaciers and thunder and lightning and that kind of stuff.
Oh no, I don't do metaphors. No.
Maybe I am a romantic. So this book is really, really well researched. As a historian, that's really neat to see. Although the referencing system was a bit odd. So if reading through the book, there's pūrākau Māori, there's the history of colonisation, there's quite a bit on the Ngāi Tahu claim, there's geography, geology, and of course the history of mountaineering. So with a book like this, where do you start?
Where do you start? Well, great question, because I guess there's sort of the beginnings and then the beginnings and then the beginnings, and then suddenly it's just taken over your life. And I have this wonderful recollection of when I first sat down with my publisher in Melbourne. I was there to talk about my first book, which is a collection of short stories. They'd invited me in for a kōrero about, would I be interested in publishing a book of short stories with them? And they didn't seem hugely interested in the short stories. They didn't want to know too much about that, and I kind of started losing my nerve and thinking, maybe they don't want to publish this book after all. And what Michael, the publisher there, said to me was, he said, oh, well, have you got anything else? Have you got any other ideas? And I kind of made this up on the spot. I said, oh, yeah, like I want to go walk the Southern Alps of New Zealand, and I want to retrace all the Māori stories and histories. And they were like, how do you feel about a 2-book deal? I was like, what? And so it just sort of bubbled up out of that. But I had been thinking about it for a long time. I had been thinking, so my brother Tim, who features in the book, we go on a lot of missions together, he had started doing these long distance walks, 3 weeks at a time, solo through the Southern Alps. And I was sort of inspired by his commitment to being out in that world. And then I guess the storytelling part of me, I'd always been interested in the stories of the mountains. We grew up tramping, we grew up in the Southern Alps. But I didn't know any of the Māori stories from there, and I'd always been a bit curious. So when this opportunity in this publishers meeting came up, I thought, yeah, jump at that. But I have this hilarious recollection of them saying, all right, get us a proposal. And so I wrote it down, and one of the key things you have to do with a book proposal is talk about the timeline. How long is this going to take you? Can anyone guess how long I thought it would take me to write this book? I estimated 18 months. So 6 months of research, 6 months of getting out in the hills and walking, and 6 months of writing. Done. Fast forward 7 years. 7 years of researching, writing, walking, editing, throwing it out the window, starting again, all the things that writers do. But yeah, all in all, it's been about a decade of engaging with it.
Yeah. And you obviously... You spent a lot of time in Melbourne and in Ōtautahi. I get the feeling when I read the book that you haven't always been connected with the iwi, but you also in the book talk about a number of experts that you went and spoke to. So, how did they respond to the idea?
Yeah, well, the history there is, so I guess we grew up as urban Māori. So my mum was pretty much the only Māori lawyer in Christchurch. And so all of her clients, all of her friends within that world were Māori. We got dragged around all the marae within arm's reach of Christchurch. We grew up kind of politically Māori, so dinner table conversation at our house was the Treaty of Waitangi, it was the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. My mum was one of the Māori delegation that went to Geneva to negotiate the Declaration of Indigenous Rights. And so it was a kind of a political, a legal context, but it was not a cultural or a historical context. So I didn't know those stories. And those early connections that I had, through mum and through my wider whānau on that side, kind of reached a point of connection for me when I was 18. My first proper job was working for Ngāi Tahu in the what they call the Development Corporation. So just after settlement, Ngāi Tahu suddenly got this great big influx of money. We've gone from being 7 generations of dirt poor and all the money going into fighting the claim to suddenly having some resources. And the tribe really wanted to invest in education and resources for the younger generations. And so my job was doing the graphic design. So I met a lot of the key people who feature in the book and who I later went back to when I was a wide-eyed 18-year-old, kind of in there, keen to learn. But yeah, nearly 20 years in Melbourne, and being away is a serious disconnection. It's a long time away, even with 3 or 4 visits a year back to see people. When I did arrive on people's doorstep, kind of going, hey, I've got this idea, I'm going to write this book. As you may be able to tell, I get quite excited about things. And I have this vivid memory of one meeting with Trevor House, who's one of the key drivers of the Ngāi Tahu archive, the Ngāi Tahu cultural mapping project. And he doesn't suffer fools, I think is a good way to put it. And I just sort of talked at him with great excitement for about half an hour, I'm going to do this, I'm going to walk. And he didn't say anything. He just sort of sat there and looked at me like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, he knew my mum, he knew my whānau, but he had no idea who I was. And he basically said to me, if you want to do something like this, he said, I've been doing this for 40 years and I haven't had any thanks, haven't had any praise for it. I do it because it's the right thing to do. And yeah, he said, if you're still interested in a few years' time, come back and talk to me. Yeah. So it was really a long game. They wanted to know that you're actually committed. And what do you put, what genre do you put the book in? Ooh, travel, adventure, history, romance.
Have you got a tidy acronym?
I'm sure we could make one. Yeah, well, I mean, you used the word Trojan horse earlier, and there's something to that. So on the one hand, this is a travel adventure book. Like, I'm going to be your tour guide. Come with me. We're going to go on a dozen trips through the Southern Alps. Put on your pack, lace up your boots. We're going to go walking. We're going to retrace the journeys of ancestors. We're going to camp where they camped. We're going to try and think about the histories that they were living through when they were in those environments. And so it's kind of immersive in that way, where you're with me when I'm climbing ice. You're with me when I'm falling off the ice. You're sort of immersed in it. So it's travel adventure in that sense. But the Trojan horse aspect of it is that it's also a story about the land and the landscape and the history of the land here in Te Waipounamu. So when you go tramping and you head out into the hills, the question on my mind was, whose land is it? What's the history of that land? And how is it that we get to go to national parks and tramp in the way that we do? Where did the national parks come from? Whose land was it? What's the stories? What are the histories? What are the politics behind it? Yeah. So it's definitely then we're into history, we're into politics. Yeah, I'm
going to come back to that later. To me, when I was reading the book, the theme that kind of jumped out at me most was, and I think this is what makes it a Māori history, is that it's whakapapa. And it's not just the whakapapa of the landscape, but it's whakapapa of your ancestors, Māori and Pākehā. The next question I have is, so you mentioned a number of individuals in the book, Māori and Pākehā. If you had a chance to sit down with a couple of them, let's take 2 or 3, who would they be? Why would you sit down with them? And what would you discuss?
So do you mean some of the historic individuals in the book?
Well, I've got here, you've got people like Ihaya Tainui, Leonard Harper, Whitcomb and Laupa, Ōraki and his brothers. Yeah,
wow, definitely would sit down with Ōraki and his brothers. I mean, who wouldn't want to have a kōrero with the atua, with the gods of this land? But I think Ihaya Tainui is someone who I would be really interested to talk to. So the second chapter in the book is retracing the footsteps of a famous journey that happens, I think 1856 it was. It's considered the first European crossing of the Southern Alps, and the story has always been told from the Pākehā side, and the pass is named Harper Pass after the Pākehā who went and did that journey. But here's the thing, he had Māori guides with him who were, in matter of fact, just simply going home for Christmas, effectively. Like, it was a route that they used all the time, back and forth through the mountains. But the more I dug into that story, the more fascinated I became, because Hapa and Tainui, their lives follow this uncanny parallel. So they're both young rakatira, they're both young leaders, they've been groomed for leadership from a very early age. They both have a kind of a youth of adventuring, so, you know, they're out exploring the mountains, they're guiding, they're sort of really physically connected with that landscape. But as they get older, they both become custodians of the land. They become responsible for the land. So Ihaya Tainui becomes a member of the trust board at Arahura. So he's Kāti Waiwai, the hapu from the west coast there. Whereas Hapa becomes a trustee for enormous tracts of the South Island. His law firm is the law firm, that capital coming in from England, flowing into the colonies, it comes through his firm. And there are all these huge absentee landowners back in England, and his firm is holding the money in trust and managing the land on their behalf. So they both have these parallel lives. Then they both end up in Parliament. They both end up as members of the House of Representatives, and they share this journey as young men where they walk through the mountains on this kind of massive journey of exploration for Harper. It's the most outrageous thing he's ever done. And for Ihaya Tainui, it's just another day in the mountains. Like, it's a route that his ancestors have been using for generations. But where it kind of comes to a head is that both of them end up disgraced. And the way that they respond to that disgrace is so evocative of different attitudes and relationships to the land. So Harper, it emerges that his firm is bankrupt, and it's been bankrupt for years, and he's been trading whilst insolvent, and there are hundreds of thousands of pounds missing. There's an enormous sum of money in those days. Like, it's many millions of dollars worth in contemporary terms. And he basically washed his hands of it. He left the country, he went back to the UK, he said, the money's gone, it's not my fault, nothing you can do about it. He got extradited back here to face trial, and it was a convoluted thing, but he was the aristocracy, he was a very, very influential man, and nothing ever came of it. That money was just gone. But on the other hand, Ihaya Tainui, one night he sees a magistrate in town, and he becomes stricken, and he calls a meeting of the people, and he says that he's done wrong, and he's deeply distressed, and he says to his friends, I want you to look after my family if anything happens to me. And the next day, he had actually took his own life. And the amount of money that was concerned was £20. But his mana and his sense of responsibility and commitment to that land and his responsibility to his people was so great that, he couldn't face the idea of going on. So I think he's a hugely honourable man. Yeah. I think he was a true leader, and I still feel really emotional just thinking about it. Yeah,
I certainly did when I read it as well. I thought, that's a history that I wasn't familiar with. So that really struck me too. You did mention that you would sit down with Aoraki and his brothers if you had the chance. I wonder if you might maybe recount that pūrākau, because most people, if they're familiar with pūrākau Māori, they'll know the rangi and the papa kōrero. But Ngāi Tahu have a particular creation narrative, and so I wonder if we might have a listen to that.
I wonder if I could even read a little bit from the book about that. Where are we? Yeah, oh, actually, how about I do it like this? I just tell a quick version of that kōrero, and then maybe read a little bit about going to Aoraki to visit.
Cool.
Yeah. Yep. So I won't go into the full detail of the pūrākau, but in our story, Raki Nui or Rangi Nui, as you might know him as, and Papa Tuanuku. So Papa was not Rangi Nui's first wife. Rangi Nui's first wife was Pokuharua Te Pō, and they had a son who was Aoraki, the great mountain ancestor of our people. And so Aoraki and his brothers, when Raki remarried, when he married when he married Papa Tuanuku, Aoraki and his brothers were like, who's this new woman? Who is this new wife that our dad has got? We want to go and check her out. We want to go and meet her and sort of suss her out. So they got in their waka, they came down from the heavens, and they paddled in search of this land of Papa Tuanuku. And they paddled, and they paddled, and they paddled, and they found nothing. They just found empty, open ocean. And they decided in the end that they were going to give it up, they were going to return home. And so Aoraki, being the oldest, being the most senior person aboard, he begins to karakia. He begins his karakia, the incantation that is going to lift their giant waka out of the water and back into the sky. But not sure what was going on that day. You know, maybe he hadn't had enough coffee. Maybe he was distracted on TikTok. I'm not too sure what it was. But something went wrong and he stuffed up his karakia. And the waka is, you imagine this canoe, like we're talking atua here, we're talking gods. So this is a canoe that's basically the size of this island. And the whole thing starts lifting, but then he makes a hapa. He makes a mistake in his karakia and it turns over and it hits a reef and it capsizes, and his brothers and him are all tipped out into the ocean. And as you do, you clamber your way onto the back of this overturned waka to save yourself. And then they sat there and they waited for rescue. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and their hair turned white, and they froze, and then they turned to stone, and they became ka tiritiri o te moana. They became the Southern Alps. So if you ever find yourself at a vantage point back in the foothills and looking across at that sweep of the mountains, all those peaks are all the heads of the brothers. So Aoraki and all of his brothers are the main range down at Aoraki Mount Cook, and then stretching all the way up this way and all the way south as well. So when a lot of this book is about mountaineering, and it's about what attitude and approach do we take when we go into the mountains. I inherited a love of mountaineering from my Pākehā side. My great uncles were both presidents and patrons of the Canterbury Mountaineering Club. So it's very much in our whakapapa on my Pākehā side to love mountains. And what do you do if you love mountains? In a Pākehā tradition, you stand on their heads. You get to the top, you stand there. But on my taha Māori, Aoraki is our most sacred ancestor. And what is the most tapu part of the body in Te Ao Māori? It's the head. And the top of the head is really tapu. So do you touch that? No, you don't. So maybe I'll just read a little bit about my expedition to not climb Aoraki. Midnight came too soon. Alarms cut us from sleep. We rolled from our bunks straight into our boots and drank brutal coffee by head torch with adrenaline fizzing in our guts. Half an hour after opening our eyes, the four of us stood ready outside Plateau Hut beneath a wild blaze of stars. South towards the pole, a vast emptiness blotted the Milky Way. I looked up at that pyramid of darkness, blacker than night, and quietly greeted the mountain. 2 shooting stars, one after the other, zipped towards the horizon, only to be extinguished by its bulk. Aoraki was a mass of rock and ice, an ancestor, a god. Guys, can we take a moment? I asked, feeling a little self-conscious because mountaineers aren't necessarily a particularly spiritual lot. But the others gathered around and switched off their lights. There was an old Ngāi Tahu chant about Aoraki that I wanted to share with them and with the mountain. In Māori, I told Aoraki who we were and why we had come. And then the old chant rang softly in the emptiness of the Grand Plateau. Ngā tau ko tau tūroa tāna ko tau mārama. The chant comes from Matiahatira Mōrehu, the chief who wrote the 1849 letter of protest to Lieutenant Governor Eyre that began the Ngāi Tahu claim, and it contains our creation story. It begins in pure blackness with the many voids with a womb of darkness. From the voids emerges Māku, who couples with the long unbroken horizon to give birth to Raki, the Sky Father, who couples with his first wife, Pokuharua Te Pō, who is the breath of life from the womb of darkness, and she gives birth to Aoraki. So the highest peak in New Zealand is the firstborn son of the sky. Life and weather and land flow from his shoulders. He is our oldest and most sacred ancestor and the symbol of the tribe. Over the century-and-a-half fight for justice, the return and renaming of Aoraki became central to the restoration of the tribe's mana. Ngāi Tahu's best-known proverb says that we will bow our heads only to Aoraki. And the most sacred part is his head. No one should ever stand on the head of a chief. But on this crisp, mid-December night, we were setting out in the footsteps of our European forebears. They climbed Mount Cook with axe and rope, intent on planting their boots on top. Aoraki was named Mount Cook, after that spearhead of British exploration and colonisation of the South Pacific. The peak's mile-long summit ridge and tremendous pyramidal form have drawn generations of climbers. From the 1880s, dozens of attempts saw parties get within a few hundred metres of the summit, only to be forced back by darkness or storms. Now, around 150 people climb the mountain each year. Aoraki Mount Cook, an ancestor to bow your head to, a peak to climb. Both impulses were in my blood. Ko aoraki me raka maumau tāna tāwhiri a mātea, ko tūtera ki whānoa uira, ki te maha nui a Māui, ko tau takata tihe mauri ora. At the end of the chant, we stood focused and quiet in the dark. It was the last time we would be still for the next 18 or so hours. The others were gunning for the climbers' summit, a few steps short of the highest point. This is where Ngāi Tahu asks mountaineers to stop. I wanted to attempt a different type of mountaineering. My plan was to go most of the way up, but at some point, deliberately and perhaps perversely, to turn back. I wanted to pay my respects to the ancestor, to speak aloud some of our Aoraki traditions, and also to honour my Pākehā climbing family, who loved the mountain as well. I wasn't sure where I would force myself to turn around. I felt the usual thrill of anticipation at setting out on a climb, and underneath that, a thin, bright shaft of fear. Since the godly avalanche, which maybe we'll talk about later, I'd become mildly paranoid in loose snow conditions on exposed ground. I wasn't looking forward to descending the Linda Shelf, and I still didn't know what to believe about signs and omens and Aoraki as a centre of spiritual power. Should I be here at all? Some elders had said yes, some had said no. I wasn't sure where I stood, or rather, where I should stand. The four of us nodded to each other. Time to go.
We'll get to the near-death experience. It's interesting that you say for Ngāi Tahu people they won't summit. Earlier this year, a group of us, my brother, sister, cousins, decided that we'd walk up Tapawai or Uanuku, and I knew that people don't, Ngāi Tahu people don't go to the summit of Aoraki. I think the way I kind of reasoned it for us to get to the summit of Tapawai or Uanuku is that the kōrero is about getting there. Yeah, but what I trying to rebrand myself as a mountain man. It wasn't very good either. We left on the 18th of January, up through the Awatiri and up the Hodder, and because it was summer, I thought the only thing I have to worry about is sunburn. And so I didn't pack for the summit very well. Yeah. And it was very cold. There was snow. 100 people were saying 100 kilometre an hour winds. Oosh. People had actually turned back. Right. For the men, the testosterone took over, and the safety went by the way. And we did get to the top. And yeah, if we do it again, I'm going to be very prepared. But I wonder if you might share that story about your near-death experience, because it does remind us that these places, while beautiful, can be extremely dangerous.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's one of the things I thought a lot about doing this book is the different ways of reading landscape. So there's the kind of literal way of reading landscape in terms of topography. You have a map, you figure out a path through it, you read the terrain, and it's a sort of a language that we use that's very similar to reading a book or a text. And I felt like I was reasonably good at that. I felt like I knew how to read a map, I knew how to navigate in whiteouts. I kind of had that covered. And yet there are other ways of reading terrain that emerged through, I guess, looking back at old manuscripts, looking at some of the spiritual traditions of Aoraki, and also talking to a lot of our elders who have a very different lens on those mountains. Like, I think for my generation who have not grown up internalizing the spiritual aspect, the idea of Aoraki as an ancestor at times is real and at times is a metaphor. But there were people that I was talking with and walking with who it's absolutely real and it's embodied and it's lived, and that connection is felt on a really deep level. And in that way of thinking about the mountains, it's a place of omens, they're a place of signs, of tohu, of things that you need to read and be aware of. And one of the journeys that I did that I think just kind of rammed home to me where I was literate and where I was illiterate was this journey up the Godley. So this is up the back of Takapo of Lake Tekapo, it's sometimes called. There's a high alpine pass there that we've got some old manuscripts that suggest it might have been used as a route. There were pass sites on either side of the mountains. There's no easier way through within several hundred kilometres. This would be the most logical way to do it, especially in the old days when glaciation was much more extensive than it is now. There was possibly a passageway there. So I sort of thought, I'm just going to go have a look. It's the middle of winter, we've had a fair bit of snow. I'm just going to go to the foot of the pass and have a look at it. And as I set off up that valley, everything that you could think of went wrong. Like, you name it, it went wrong. Like, on the first day, I dropped my beanie, and in the middle of winter, not having a hat's really serious. I did have a spare one, but it wasn't a very good one. I dropped other bits of gear on that day. There was a howling nor'wester that was sort of like one step forward, half a step backwards, just really in your face. That night at the hut, I tore my contact lens, and so I had to wear my glasses, and that's not what I want to be doing in alpine terrain. And my gaiters blew away, and I found I'd left all my notes behind. And that night, when I was in the hut, I kept thinking someone was walking past the window. Like, I'd be here in the hut, and there'd just be something flickering out the corner of my eye, and I'm like, who is that? And I kept going outside and opening the door and kind of calling out, and there's no one there. But then I noticed that actually what I was seeing was distant lightning flickering in the distance towards the direction of where I was going over the pass. There was just this sort of electrical shimmer in the air, and it was not a good feeling at all. I kept going, haere tonu. I'm a stubborn person. I'm like, I'm going to the pass. And I found my way barred at every point. So normally you walk across the Godley Lake. At that time of year, it should be frozen solid. It's thick ice, you just walk your way across. But with our changing climate, that lake was only frozen in bands, and a lot of it was still liquid. So there's no way I could walk across the lake, climb up around the side. The moraine has receded so much that it's now just constant artillery fire. It's just rocks raining down the whole time. So I can't go that way. Then I spot a route up onto the ridge. I'm like, oh, if I climb that other mountain range and traverse and then drop down, I can do that. All right, I can do that. So I did that. And the whole time I'm like, I'm not actually going to go to the pass. I'm just going to the foot. I'm just going to go look at it. And just go a little bit further, just go a little bit further, just go a little bit further. And the closer I got to the pass, the more intense the storm, the more intense the wind, the more things that kept going wrong, that I kept losing. And I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing. And shall I read the... Yeah. Each step became a struggle. I fought my way up through waist-deep powder that refused to provide a firm footing. The wind blasted ice into my skin like hail. One more step. Another. The angle in the gully wasn't bad at all, and then it was awful. I looked up towards the lip of the icefall, way too steep to go on. That, above me, was the killer angle, where loose snow sat poised and ready to go. Time to get out of this gully. I had not taken a full set of ice tools or serious climbing gear or a climbing partner. I hadn't intended to do any proper climbing, so I only had one ice axe, but it would do the trick. I swung the pick into the solid blue serac next to me, kicked in my crampons, and front pointed on up. Solid purchase underfoot. I was moving again. The steepest seracs through the icefall were marginally safer, having already shed their loose snow, but I was sweating so much my glasses had fogged. Cursing my torn contact lenses, I hung off my axe with my free hand, and with my free hand zipped my glasses into the pocket of my shell. I only needed to see as far as the next swing of the pick. The wind rang maddeningly in my ears. Spindrift stung my face. I was so close. Right near the top of the icefall, the angle of the ice finally lessened. Snow once again dusted the glacier underfoot. No longer front pointing, I booted a crampon in and got 10 points into solid ice. Good. I felt myself relax. I would make the pass. 2 more steps. Come on. Another step, and the points of my crampons met no resistance. My boot sank all the way in. It was just snow resting on ice. Oh, fuck, I said aloud. A crack formed beneath my boot and raced away across the pristine white surface. Just a hairline, a metre or so long, irrelevant among 500 kilometres of storm-bound Alps. I was the only living soul who knew of its existence. I had time to watch it form. I had time to think, slab avalanche. I had time to dive left because time had stopped. And then I was gone. So, yeah, about a 60-metre fall, buried in an avalanche, and I really didn't think I was going to make it.
Yeah. Well, a couple more questions, and then I might, if we've got time, there's a couple of questions from the crowd.
Yeah.
So, another theme that I picked up in the book was the nature and use of pūrākau and oral traditions. And you write about the nature of oral traditions. Who has the right to recite them? Mm-hmm. What's an authentic tradition? Mm-hmm. And you talk a little bit about the songs of Waitaha. And I remember the songs of Waitaha when it came out because it was shiny and flash and those, so it's easy to get drawn into. But I wonder if you might make a couple of comments about who do the oral traditions belong to, because there was a part in the book there where you talked about you were travelling and there was one of the people who you spoke to had talked about some other Māoris who'd come over, who'd come to do to do some exploring, and they were asked to, can you share some of these oral traditions, and they didn't. So I think that's an interesting.
It really is. I mean, this is one of the things. It's like these stories are not public property. And this was one of the clear things that came through, is that every iwi, every hapu, every whānau has their own stories, and what's in here is just what people were willing to share. And as I went around and talked to people and kind of told them who I was and what I was doing and why, some of them, were really hesitant, skeptical, and then later, over time, came to share things. Others were really generous with it. Others wouldn't share anything, and that is absolutely their right. They're their whānau stories for them to tell when the time is right for them, and so I absolutely respect that. One of the things that I became obsessed with was the kind of self-appointed tohunga, the people who have kind of helped themselves to stories. And, it can be perceived from the outside of the culture as this kind of petty sensibility to be so possessive about these stories. Like, why is it such a big deal that someone else might relay this story or tell this or that? But it's things like the songs of Waitaha that kind of give you an insight into why people get so exercised about it. Like, at face value, if you were going to find a book about the Ngāi Tahu or the Māori relationship to the Southern Alps, Barry Brailsford's work would be a really good place to look, because he's written extensively about spiritual traditions in the mountains from a Māori perspective. Problem is that those traditions are bogus. He made them up. And he went so far out of his way to present his credentials, because he'd done a lot of really valuable work for Māori. He was a recognised authority in certain areas, But when he was entrusted with a new project, it kind of went to his head, is my take on it.
Yeah.
And what came out, so initially he was going to be writing a history of Ngāi Tahu, Ngāti Māmoe and Waitaha, and once some of the stuff he was writing got under the noses of some of our senior leaders, they could see that he'd gone off the rails, and they withdrew support in a really major way. And he ended up making it just about Waitaha, and the traditions that are in there, you know, I think there were some legitimate sources, but what ended up coming out, like you mentioned that to any senior person within Ngāi Tahu and they see red, like it is so enraging to see all that tradition and all that knowledge kind of bastardized, shall we say. Yeah, so it makes, and stuff like that's happened right throughout history. There is a history of people helping themselves and producing these things that look authoritative, sound authoritative, and you could be forgiven for reaching for them and thinking here's the knowledge. Okay. So having a process, I guess, having, I mean, don't get me wrong, like I was desperately scared that someone was going to stand up and challenge me. And in fact, when I started this book, Mum said to me, you know that you're going to get caned. Like, you put this out there, people will stand up and they will say, what's your right to tell that story? Yeah. You know, where's your permission? And so the process was of sending the manuscripts back to the people who I had interviewed, and also just working with people like Tā Tipene to go through, you know, Tipene went through the manuscript twice with me and, you know, caught all my, well not all, but yeah, I mean the mistakes that are still in there are my mistakes, but just trying to make it safe, I guess. Yeah.
Got one more question before we open it up to the floor, and I lifted a few sentences out of a review of the book, and it's by Ross Cullen. I always tell my students when they're doing research for assignments, go to the book review. That's always quite helpful. And anyway, Ross says, don't be deterred by the thought that Uprising is woke and arouse angst. Nic Low is one of us, keen on a beer and a pie, attracted to women, and now a parent. Unable to tear himself away from the window of Christchurch Melbourne flights, asked to be seated on the left side flying west, right side flying home. Uprising is carefully researched, well written, makes dozens of astute observations, enjoys taking the piss, and takes New Zealand mountaineering literature to somewhere new and overdue. I don't know much about mountaineering literature, but I think everything else is pretty on point. But the question is, angst can be a good thing, isn't it? Yeah, interesting. So I wrote, the first version of this book was twice as long, so you imagine this twice as fat. Like, that's kind of an intimidating proposition in the bookstore. And it was full of angst. It was sort of, I call it my undergrad righteousness, that I sometimes get into that mode where I just want to like hammer the points. And, you know, there were grave injustices that Ngāi Tahu suffered, and there are atrocities that happened in our country and in the South Island that are not talked about. And there are things that still bring the rage. And the first version I wrote was kind of saturated with that, and I felt like I needed to kind of get that out of my system. But I just remember a conversation with one of my aunties, Auntie Jane Davis, from Murihiku, from Ōraka, and we were down at Ōhupokeka, we were down at Anita Bay at the head of Milford Sound. Now there is a greenstone source there, and our people have rights to collect that stone, and we were on a 3-week journey to transport that stone back to our marae on the coast in Southland, walking, paddling, tramping, and there at Anita Bay, at Ōhupokeka, I was talking to her about an atrocity that happened there. There was a group of Ngāi Tahu, a group of our relations, about a dozen of them, there in the bay that were collecting takiwai, they were collecting the greenstone, and a party of whalers came round the headland, and Hupokeka, the chief, stood up on this famous rock there to welcome them in.
and the sealers shot him from their boat, and then they pulled the boat into the shore and they shot everybody on the shore, and anyone who survived, they put the survivors in the boat, set it on fire and pushed it out to sea. And we were there in the place where it happened, and we were collecting the stone from that same place. And so we're thinking about those histories, and those histories are embedded in the place names all around there. Like, all the place names in this book have got histories behind them. And I was sort of ranting about this, and Janie turns to me and she just very quietly, in her kind of quiet and dignified way, she says, you know, plenty of your ancestors were sealers as well. You know, she said, and our people did some pretty horrific things back then too. And we went on to talk about, I guess, the need for balance, the need for generosity, the need to acknowledge the wrongs and to acknowledge the connections and the bonds, and that neither of them cancel each other out, that you can't, by focusing on this, get rid of that, or the other way around. Like, they're both equally true. And so I think that's what I've tried to do throughout the book, is focus on both the darkness, you know, the terrible histories that have happened, and focus on the reconnection, the revitalisation, and all the generosity that's gone on as well.
Yeah, I think you make a good point in the book about trying to re-energise Ngāi Tahu's walking culture. Yeah. Hey, that was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. We've got a couple of minutes, and I know that we've got some mountaineers in the crowd. I know Ron Crosby does a bit of walking, and my old PE teacher's up there somewhere. There he goes. So if anybody has some questions, Sonia, how long? Which Sonia? Oh, how long have we got? It's 20. Oh, okay then. So we've got 8 minutes. If people have questions. Kia ora, Ron.
There we are. Can I just ask, you were critical brothers for the songs of Waita, and his earlier material, presumably you'd looked at, the Greenstone Trails.
Yes.
Any up or down?
Greenstone Trails, first edition, major thumbs up. Yeah, fantastic resource. I used it all the time.
That's a relief to hear.
Yes, no. His first two books are legit, are wonderful. It's just what came after that, not so much.
If we don't have any questions, we've got this here. Yep.
Hi, Nick. Thank you. What was the highlight of this big project?
The highlight was the trip that I did, that I just sort of briefly alluded to before, the 3-week journey down through Fiordland and into Southland. It was the kind of culmination, I guess, of so many different aspects, but to be able to do it in a big whānau group. So there were about 30 of us involved in that journey over 3 weeks. We collected the stone from Milford Sound. We sea kayaked Milford Sound. We walked the Milford track backwards, which was an absolute highlight, because there'd been an enormous storm before, just immediately when we arrived there, and the track got closed and a bridge washed out, and so they helicoptered all the other walkers off the track, and so we got to walk the Milford track with no one else on it. We had the whole thing to ourselves. It was phenomenal. And then, my cousins in their Ōraka-Aparima boats picked us up, and we paddled across all the inland lakes and either tramped or ran the routes between them to link up the whole journey and out to the south coast of Southland. And arriving at our marae at Takitai o Te Titi in Colic Bay to present the stone that we'd carried with us, and that, generations worth of our whānau had carried that stone, and to hand it over at the marae was such an emotional experience, because it was 1838 was the last time that overland journey had been done. So to kind of bring that back and reconnect the wider whānau there to those inland landscapes was really profound.
Hi, I really enjoyed your book. I read it a while ago, so I'm sorry I can't remember exactly all the characters, but the thing that stood out to me was your first journey when you were doing it by yourself, and you were following the path of a solitary female who did the path, and I just wondered whether you had mentioned her or that relevance. And
yeah, that is a magic story, that one. So Raureka was the first woman, or the first person, to cross the Alps. And, you know, the Southern Alps, ka tiritiri o te moana, it's one of the great mountain chains in the world. And so the origin story of the first human to cross that is a woman called Raureka. She was from the Ngāti Wairaki tribe on the west coast, who were the ancestors there before Ngāi Tahu, who we conquered and married into and absorbed. And her story fascinated me because, yeah, it's her journey of having an enormous fight with her family. You know, she was a teenager, they say, and teenagers do have fights with their family, and they do storm off, but they normally go to their friend's house. She crossed the Southern Alps. It must have been a hell of a fight. And so, yeah, retracing her footsteps and trying to get inside her headspace and be like, why did she go this way? Why not that way? And yeah, I guess it's a long story we probably don't have time to go into here, but the thing I took away from it is that so many of our stories are oral maps. And this was kind of one of the key takeaways, is that what I realized is that in retracing her journey and retelling her story, all the key landmarks that I needed to navigate that landscape are embedded in the story. And then you start looking at all the other stories, and they're the same. So many Māori songs, chants, stories are actually oral maps. They've got the landscapes embedded in them that allow you to remember the route.
Kia ora, Nick. Thanks for sharing your insights. I wanted to know how much did the support you did or didn't get from various people affect what you did or didn't include in the book in terms of the pūrākau and other stories?
I think the biggest thing was sort of understanding that this could only ever be an incomplete work, that this would only ever be the tip of the iceberg or the signpost to kind of point people to the deeper knowledge. And so once I felt like some people would share and some people wouldn't, and that was a positive thing, like the fact that people were keeping stories for themselves and that they had a vision for things that they wanted to tell, that they wanted their family to tell, that's a sign of a thriving culture. That's a sign of people who that things are working as they should. So when stories didn't come to me, or I didn't feel like I was the right person to tell them, or that I didn't feel qualified, that's a kind of exciting thing, because it means there are many other books still to be written. And yeah, just there's so much more than what's in this book. So things that have been withheld, they'll find their way out there at some point.
That's probably a nice segue, because we've only got a couple of minutes left. The new book.
The new book. Oh, well, the new book is something different again, but very quickly, very briefly, so the new book is called Little Doomsdays, and it's about, it's similar themes in a way, but it's about how can I describe it? It's about 5,000 years of human history, and it's about arks, burial chambers, wakahuia, time capsules. It's about how do humans try and preserve what's important to them and project it into the future. So yeah, when I looked at previous civilizations, and when they are faced with their own demise, what do? How do they try and hang on to what they love and preserve that for the future? So it's a collaboration with the artist Phil Dadson. I think sadly there are no copies of that in the bookshop either. But if you would like that, or if you'd like a copy of Uprising, they are taking orders. This print run has sold out, so we're onto a third reprinting, which is on its way from Australia. So if you would like a copy of the book, or either of those books, you can pre-order it at the bookshop.
Cool. Well, that's us. Hey, thank you very much, Nick. I enjoyed that heaps. It's the first one I've ever done. And you made it real easy. So yeah, thank you. Kia ora.